input processing. One of the so-called models or theory regarding the interactionist approach, explaining how does it all work, was given by Van Patten, who presented it first in 1996, and until 2002, he continued his work on the model so as to develop it further. This also became very popular because it also had a component related to pedagogy, which he called processing instruction. That is, it does not only did not only explain how it all happened, that is, the learning took place, but he also somehow shed light on how teaching should be directed. So what Van Patten tried to do is that he tried to explain how environmental second language input converts into intake. If you would remember, we said there is a difference between intake and input. Input is whatever is around our environment, and intake is whatever we select from our environment or the language in the environment and pay attention to it and process it in our minds. So Van Patten wanted to see that how does it actually convert into intake. So linguistic data actually, he said, was processed from the input that comes to the learners. They select what they want to pay attention to it. However, they do not pay attention to all of the input. So if you are delivering a lecture to your students, they will not pick up all the aspects of the lecture. However, their attention will be selective and they will only pay attention to some specific parts depending their interests or depending on at what point in the lecture the information has been given. So whenever the learners want to process the language, that is input language, into intake, they will always hold it in the working memory first for further processing. Now, the interesting bit is that although we call it a model because this is the best we have as yet, it is not a complete model of how the processes actually take place. It only gives us a set of principles to keep in mind, on the basis of which we can sort of assume that what parts or what selective parts of the lecture or what selective parts of the utterance or the feedback that you give to the students will actually take it up. So actually what it does, Van Patten's model, it explains why the learners fail to somehow process all of the input that comes to them. So it does not explain how it happens, but it says why would they not pay attention to specific inputs. So this is done through proposing certain principles. So the first principle he would say is that learners have preferences for semantic processing rather than morphological processing. That means semantic would mean meaning making. They are more interested in the meaning of the sentence or the word rather than paying attention to the verb form, morphological changes like ed, traveled, went. So they will pay always more attention to the meaning making process itself. Sorry, for instance, if there is an utterance, we traveled by train yesterday. So a second language learner who has not completely learned the language might say, we traveled by train yesterday. So he or she will pay less attention to ED, and he or she will pay more attention to this yesterday, because that somehow serves the purpose of the second language learner to identify the time at which the train journey was undertaken. The second principle was that the learners have a preference for the beginning and the ending of the sentence. So whenever you talk to them or you recast something, they will pick up the recast or pick up the feedback that relates to the beginning of the sentence, or if it relates to the end of the sentence. Now, this approach has led to a series of experiments in which, in their effort to teach the learners those morphological changes, like changes in the word form, the teachers have focused more on strategies in which they can highlight the change in the word. So once as teachers, you come to know that what are the salient spaces where the learners pay more attention, almost instinctively, then you try to place the information that has to be taught in those places, that is at the beginning of the sentences and at the ends of the sentences. And if you know, for instance, that my learner will not pay attention to this ED form, traveled ED form, when talking about something that happened in the past, then you highlight those and you try to different strategies to focus more on the teaching of those items.